All right. Let me just change this. So as Mike had described, we've been having this conversation, I'm going to say probably about 4 months now. When he first approached me, he was like, it's just a testimony. But I felt like God wasn't ready. God wasn't ready for me to give it. Let's put it that way. I wasn't ready. Let's put it that way. And you'll find out as to why as I go through. Before I begin my testimony, though, I'm going to start by reading Matthew 22, 37 to 40. It says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. This is the greatest and first commandment. Second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the laws and the prophets." You will also find out as I read my testimony how this impacted my testimony of loving others as yourself. Because as a child, I feared rejection, acceptance by my peers, the unknown, and often isolated myself, and then judged myself for it. It's difficult to be able to love others if you can't even love yourself. So I found that I wanted to escape and found comfort in addictions. Even though I was considered intelligent and athletic, I still struggled with being acceptance and fear. I liked to lie to bend the truth and stole to get what I wanted. But I didn't like being caught. We'll put it that way. Unfortunately, at the age of 11, I was introduced to sexual sin, pornography. And then unfortunately, it has also been impacting me since. Our family did attend Blythe United Church, Living Water Christian Fellowship, and a few other things. Actually, back that up one there. My family attended Blythe United Church, and I became a Christian around the age of 13. And my conversion happened because of a live production of Heaven's Gates and Hell's Flames. I was so terrified of going to hell that I said I need to become a Christian. That kind of fits along with the rest of my childhood as well. Fear-driven. But I also wanted to be faithful during my teen years. And during that time, I was involved in Living Water Christian Fellowship, Gory Bible Chapel, youth groups, Bible studies, retreats, spiritual warfare education, and also genre-geared counseling, if anyone knows of Caring for the Heart. And then at the age of 16, I was baptized by Ernest. At the age of 14, I was afraid to step forward into the unknown. So I had to get a job, though, and fortunately my brother and his employer were Christians, so I was able to work on a farm. And we often listened to sermons during our lunch hours. But during high school, I had a dream of becoming a heart surgeon, but I lacked the confidence and the discipline. And uncertain about my future career, at the age of 18, I visited someone at Heritage Bible College in Cambridge, Ontario. Trying to listen to God's plan and follow his plan for my life, I felt like I needed to go there, and so I did at the age of 19. But unfortunately, I still struggle with doubt, insecurities, and fears. I met my wife 2 years into Bible college, and we both completed our degrees. But I also knew that because of my addictions and other things, I was not ready for ministry. Now, my faith of God was important to me, but I also needed to be financially supportive of my family. So I was able to get into the trades. I became a general laborer, which led into a full-time apprenticeship as a metal fabricator, and then that led into being a millwright. So technically, I have 10 years of education. I was still addicted to video games, though, and places where I could escape. Tried to be a good husband, but struggled. Really struggled. I tried to reach out to others for help and support during that entire time. But because of my desire to avoid confrontation and struggles, it hindered my relationship. I had unmet expectations, so I slowly withdrew. Between 2010 and 2015, problems continued to persist, even after 6 children, 3 of which were miscarriages. Regardless of our problems, I was committed to the relationship because that is what I believed I was supposed to do. But by 2016, the pain hurt that I had for unresolved conflict, in addition to me isolating myself, I frequently slept in a different place. Never in the same, usually not in the same bedroom. But I still look back and I can see God's provision through the entire process, through everything. In April 2020, as COVID became a global issue, we did purchase a new house. A month previous to that, 2 months before that, I'd also had a new job. My children and wife moved into the new house. I, on the other hand, stayed in a trailer outside due to relational issues. I was angry. I was alone. I felt rejected, unwanted. And to make matters worse, in the winter of 2020, I didn't even get to move into my house. Instead, I got to move into the basement, away from my family. And then in May 2021, my ex asked for a divorce. But unfortunately, I was never allowed to tell anyone about it. She wanted to make sure it was dealt with quickly. I didn't even get to tell my parents until 6 months after. But I also I reached a breaking point where I had to tell somebody in the church. So after she told me she was leaving, I was angry, hurt, bitter, resentful, depressed, rejected. I felt like I was responsible for everything. I actually believed I was a terrible person, a terrible father, and the divorce was all my fault, that I'd failed God and my family. I also could not comprehend why I lost everything. I thought I was being a good father. I thought I was being a decent husband. Which also led to me starting to question everything I believed about myself and about God. I didn't lose my faith. I just started to question as to why I believed what I did. So how do I carry on from there? How do I deal with the loss of my family and the emotions I'm feeling? Because I had literally shut down emotionally before that. This was just the breaking point. So while on my face before God, on the floor, asking, I came across a verse, Ezekiel 35, 27 or 25 to 28. To summarize it, it's really that God is saying that I'm going to take your heart of stone and put a new heart of flesh within you. I'm going to take my spirit, I'm going to put my spirit within you. Here's the kicker. I'm going to put my spirit in you to teach you my laws and statutes. God was promising this to the Israelites to change their hearts, but I took it as a promise for myself as well, that he was going to put his spirit within me to teach me his laws and statutes. I began listening to sermons 24/7, nonstop, all the time. And because of this verse and also sermons by Chip Ingram, I began to realize my misconceptions about God and my faith. My experiences as a child and as I grew up impacted how I viewed God and how much I trusted him. And if anyone has ever came across me talking about these, this is where this card came from and why it is so important for me. In that summer of 2021, this is what I held on to. God gave me that basement room, God met me in that basement room, and he gave me a peace and a comfort that I will never be able to experience and haven't. Actually, up till now, it's progressed a whole lot further, but up until that point, nothing I'd ever felt until that point had ever been like that. I've never met him like it. I no longer felt actually angry or bitter towards my wife, but sympathy and acceptance for her decisions. But I prayed for guidance and wisdom to navigate the divorce or the separation. My attitude changed 180. Quickly, 1 month afterwards, it was just a complete 180. But it still didn't change the outcome of the separation. In November 2021, I moved back in with my parents, despite having a very strained and difficult relationship for the past 10 years. But God had already, as everyone might know, dominoes. I could see the dominoes being prepared and God lining everything up. He prepared living arrangements with my parents. He provided work at the salt mine. And as bitter as I was, I knew that it was a decision I needed to make. I didn't want to leave the city. It was my home. While here, I've struggled with independence, finding success for myself, identity, friendships, and even finding a new partner. Because as of today, I'm still not divorced. Almost 4 years later. I felt like I was capable of caring for myself and for my family, and now I'm back living with my parents, which seems like a very degraded way of looking and seeing life, but it is what it is. In June 2021, I struggled with spiritual gifts because I thought I knew what they were. So with this confusion, I decided to take 3 spiritual gifts, tests, 3 different spiritual tests. The results were actually prophecy, teaching, and administration. That is not me at that time. And the thoughts that went through my mind is, who's going to listen to a divorced preacher? We already have enough preachers as is, so we don't need another one. But with this information, I approached Ernest in January of 2022. And he actually was encouraging about it. He's like, you know what, let's not just say we don't know what's going on. Let's talk about it. Let's try to figure out what's going on. So he reached out to a few people, and I started preaching at Heartland Community Church. That was a bad decision because I really enjoyed preaching. It was a lot of fun. Unfortunately, my term ended October 4th, 2022. The reason why is because I was charged by the Waterloo Regional Police that night. They came, they stopped, and I spent a night in jail. The day before, the Sunday before, because it happened on a Monday, I was preaching about God is love. Very appropriate to see if I learned my lesson or not. And then while I was in the prison, I was remembering Paul, how he would sing songs through all the ordeal. And I was so frustrated with myself. I'm like, why can't I remember anything? Next time, maybe. But I had learned while I was living in the basement in 2021 to trust God's character because he's always the same regardless of my circumstances. And that's what got me through that. So for 2.5 years, I have been wrestling with feelings of shame, guilt, doubt, uncertainty, my purpose, acceptance, and wanting to belong as well. I've always felt like an outcast, partially due to my fears and rejection, and also sometimes I just don't feel like I fit in. But I held on to that hope, that feeling of hope when God met me in that basement. Because of God's wisdom and mercy, I cried out for peace and amends during my entire process. But the devil was attacking with lies and deceit. The enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And so I understood that he was the one that was the problem. It was not anybody else. So I needed understanding to navigate that whole process, which brought me to 1 Corinthians 1:25. The foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. So I had to learn how to, again, I refer to this card a lot. I had to start trusting who God is and who he says he is more than I can understand. He teaches me wisdom, peace, patience, and truth. So I was able to then approach life and others with that genuine love and concern. I started to change into more of a light. I was told that we need to be the light and enter that and purposely enter the dark areas of this world. But if I'm still afraid of fear, rejection, stuff like that, it's going to be very difficult for God to actually change me into those. A little bit later, we'll actually hear the verse in 2 Corinthians 4:6 about let your light shine out of the darkness. When I moved back to the area, I struggled with attending church and developing relationships because of the circumstances that happened with me. An example of my emotional state during that time was when the very first time I attended Huron Chapel. I was welcomed at the front door by a familiar face and offered to be able to get together with them outside of the church. But this was the scariest thing for me to do, because I was struggling with my separation and the feeling of abandonment by previous relationships, especially people that were in the church and that I trusted. The well-intentioned offer became completely overwhelming for me, and I withdrew. But God did send a friend to me that was able to reach me where I was and was able to pull me from a cocoon of fear and self-preservation. Through that one person, I was able to trust again, to be vulnerable and deal with conflict in a healthier manner, and not run away as quickly. A couple of years ago, I did share a little bit of my struggles of what was going on with court. But I will tell you that one day I did not want to come to church. But God insisted that I do it, and I was not going to have a settled spirit until I said something. And once I said it, the peace came. And it's happened more than once. I was up here in the front, and the Spirit was just like, you need to do this. And I'm like, okay, I already know what that feels like. I'm going to do it. And once I did it, peace. So I'm trying to learn how to, instead of make excuses, to just listen. Now, I do sometimes still struggle with confidence and acceptance and not wanting to isolate myself. But God is changing that desire to run and isolate. Recently, I participated in a group session called Born to Be Free. Some might call it an addictions counseling, others might be like codependency. Amusingly, God introduced a few men who struggle with trusting others and developing emotional, deep friendships. We have learned to deal with life on our own, but struggle with trusting others. We have learned to survive because it protects ourselves. But through the wisdom and grace of God, we have developed friendships of trust and vulnerability. And if we are not surrendering everything to God, then someone's going to get kicked in the shins. So I am constantly challenged to surrender my desires, my misguided comforts like addiction, my desire to escape, and also pursuing relationships. To surrender to His greater comfort. This 13-week process changed my perception on life more than I thought, actually. I thought I had it all together going into it, and I found out I was wrong. Again, go figure. It has impacted my prayer life, my willingness to deal with spiritual warfare, my confidence, my faith, my discernment. I participated in other sessions like this, actually quite a few. But the dynamic of this group came together in such a way that God was wanting to and able to break through spiritual strongholds. He was able to deal with pains and fear and grief that we had. And I realized I'm not actually taking my Christian role seriously. I'm no longer interested in sitting on the sidelines, saying, somebody else will do it. We are in a war. I am in a war. Let's put it that way. I am in a war with the principalities of this world. And I do not want to sit on the sidelines or in the back saying, well, I'll be the logistics coordinator. I'll be good with that one. I don't want to supervise anymore. I want to deal with the battle. God wants me to express myself healthily and confront the lies so that Jesus can be my first love, as Revelation says. Now, I have not seen my children or interact with them since the day of my arrest, which is about 3.5 years now. I have had difficulty with thoughts of being a terrible father, not deserving to see them, with also hatred with the enemy for his lies and deceit that he has allowed to take place. And until my children decide to seek answers of truth and be able to pursue that, it will probably remain the same. Now, I do want to see my children, but the one thought that does come to my mind is that how much does our Heavenly Father just yearn for us? For me, is that Every single time that we pursue anything else that's aside from him is how much does his heart break. I have found out through this entire process is that the limited amount of emotions that I have and that I'm starting to feel again, how much does he have? I believe that he is the only one that has the fruits of the Spirit, and we can only learn from him, nobody else. And that when I get to heaven is that it's going to be nothing but those characteristics of God. And that if somebody is to go to hell, it means that there is no love, there is no joy, there's no peace, there's no patience, there's no kindness. It is completely void of that. And that does not sound like fun. It sounds like I don't want anyone to go there. Regardless of the circumstances I went through, I would never change it, not one bit. I'm actually very thankful that I went through it. It has been difficult, but I have found a love that surpasses my understanding. And it will also allow me to reach others that are going through similar circumstances. It allows me to reach people that need it. Over the past 5 years since my separation, I've had more conversations with people, and I've had more intentionality about reaching them or trying to understand what they view of God. There are so many opinions in this world, but I want to give them a reason as to why Jesus brings life to them. One example I had was I spoke with a 19-year-old. I asked him, "Can you describe who God is?" And his answer at a Christians men's conference is nice. That was his only response. So how can we shed the light to people if his only response is God is nice? But it depends on your perspective. I have many examples, and I wish I could share them all, but I do not have enough time during this speech, testimony. But one example I do want to give you is that while I was in Dominican, while Hurricane Melissa was coming through, I met a woman on the beach near the end of it. And all I was doing is just sitting there. And I had the Bible sitting on the end of my lawn chair, and she comes along, she looks at it and says, "Is that a Bible?" And my first response is, "Yes, God, thank you. All right, let's have a conversation." God shows up. And I expected him to show up when I went to Dominican Republic. I desire to be a diligent laborer in his field, regardless of my location, to shine his light because he deserves the affection and devotion of each person. And I believe that God will provide everything I need for his purpose, and I want my desires to change accordingly. I want God to teach me his desires for his purpose and to remove any desire that is mine. As Moses says in Exodus 33:15, "If your presence does not go before me, I'm not interested in going." My comfort has come from following his lead and being led like a cherished son. I have learned my next step of learning. I've learned my next step in my life. Right now it's learning Spanish. I dislike hearing that as well, because it's not something that comes easy to me either. Again, I don't like confrontation, but I'm more willing to actually pursue this with vigor because I know that's what God wants. And so I will focus my heart, my eyes, my soul, my mind on Jesus because he's our first love. Because I am being led by him like a child. Usually when you're a child, is all you do is you hold on to dad and he just leads the way because he has it all figured out. You don't have to worry. Well, that's exactly what I want to be. Led so I don't have to think about it. Thanks.